She was just trying to keep her father's old motel alive, one room at a time, one long night at a time, until a rain-soaked stranger knocked on her door. No ID, no money, just the quiet weight of someone the world had passed by. Could this act of kindness spark a miracle? She gave him a room, a blanket, and asked for nothing in return. 1 week later, a convoy of military jeeps pulled into her lot, and what happened next? It didn't just save her motel, it transformed it into something sacred. This is the story of Desert Haven and what can happen when kindness opens a door no one else would. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The wind howled down Highway 89 like a freight train with no brakes, dragging sheets of icy rain across the high desert and slamming them against anything foolish enough to still be standing. Desert Haven Motel was one of those things, just south of Flagstaff, Arizona, tucked behind a half-dead gas station and a forgotten diner with flickering neon stood 12 rooms lined in faded teal paint and rust-bitten trim. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Ellie Sanders stood behind the check-in counter, arms folded tight over her chest, watching the storm batter the front window. Her fingers tapped against the old Formica counter in a steady rhythm, not anxious, just tired. The vacancy sign outside had been flickering for months. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. That night, it stayed dark. She hadn't had a single check-in since Tuesday. It was now Friday. Ellie was in her mid-40s with sun-creased skin and dark hair pulled into a low ponytail. There was a quiet steadiness to her, like a fence post set deep in dry earth. She didn't smile much these days, but when she did, it was real. Behind her, the little space that doubled as her office and apartment smelled like strong coffee and damp carpet. The motel had belonged to her father, Sergeant Jack Sanders, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. He had died in the back bedroom 2 years ago. Surrounded by faded metals and the hum of an oxygen tank, Ellie had stayed. Most people in her shoes would have sold it off, packed up, and moved to somewhere with real winters and work in plumbing. But Desert Haven wasn't just a place, it was memory. It was her father's pride, and now, it was all she had left. Still, pride didn't pay electricians, and the fire marshal hadn't been subtle. 2 weeks ago, he'd handed her a warning. The motel's fire alarms were outdated, the breaker box looked like something out of a Cold War bunker, and the wiring in rooms 3 through 7 was quote an insurance company's worst nightmare. She had 10 days, 5 were gone. She tried the bank twice. They'd smiled politely and said no. The second time they didn't even pretend to check. Ellie sighed and reached for her lukewarm coffee when the bell over the lobby door jingled. It wasn't the soft chime it used to be. It screeched like metal grinding against metal. She flinched, looked up. He stood just inside the threshold, soaked to the bone. Rainwater pooled around his boots. A green military-style jacket clung to his frame, darkened with moisture. He carried no umbrella, no bag, just a backpack slung over one shoulder, worn thin at the seams. For a second, neither of them spoke. His face was lean, maybe late 50s, jaw squared, eyes sharp, but tired like someone who'd once commanded rooms, now too weary to bother. Rain dripped from the brim of his hood. His right hand stayed tucked close to his side, fingers curled with stiffness. Sorry to barge in, he said, voice low and gravelly. I was walking. The storm came on fast. Ellie gave a slow nod. You're lucky not to be frozen out there. Would have kept going, but the shoulders flooding, not much choice. She hesitated, took him in. The jacket had a faint patch on the right side, long since faded, but she knew the shape, knew the silhouette of that eagle and anchor. You military? She asked quietly. Used to be, he said, then added, long time ago. Where were you headed? North? Just passing through. Ellie looked at the ancient guest log in front of her. The keys to every room hung on the board behind her, all still there. Room 5 had the best heater, still worked miraculously. No ID? She asked, tilting her head just slightly. He shook his head. Wallet's gone. Bus station said the last one out was cancelled. I'm not looking to cause trouble, just need a dry place for the night. Ellie stared at him for a beat longer. He didn't look like trouble, he looked like someone used to hearing no but asking anyway. She reached under the counter, pulled the key for room 5, and slid it across the counter. No charge, she said. You'll find extra towels in the dresser. Shower takes forever to heat up. The man blinked, almost like he hadn't expected her to say yes. Thank you, he said, voice quieter now. Ellie gave a small nod. What's your name, Ray? She didn't ask for a last name, and he didn't offer one. Could this stranger hold a hidden past? An hour later, Ellie stood in front of room 5 with a clean blanket and a chipped ceramic mug filled with hot tea. She knocked twice. Ray opened the door, now in dry clothes, at least mostly dry. He'd hung his jacket over the heater vent, steam curling off its sleeves. I figured you might need this, she said, offering both the mug and the blanket. He looked surprised, then slowly took them. You're kind, he said. Not many would have done this. Ellie shrugged. My dad ran this place for 30 years, taught me not to ask too many questions when someone's just cold and tired. He gave a small smile. It didn't reach his eyes, but it was honest. Your dad military, too? Yeah, Marines, Vietnam. Ray's smile grew, just barely. Figures. He turned slightly, letting her see the wall by the bed where his backpack now rested, neatly placed. Everything about him was tidy, deliberate. Even in weariness, he moved like someone still halfway in uniform. Let me know if you need anything, Ellie said, stepping back. Storm's not letting up anytime soon. I'm used to waiting things out, he said softly. She paused at that, then nodded once and walked back into the night. The door clicked shut behind her. That night, Desert Haven remained mostly dark. The rain fell harder, wind rattled the windows, and the front office smelled like coffee, dust, and stories no one told out loud anymore. In room 5, Ray sat on the edge of the bed, hands wrapped around the warm mug. The sound of thunder rolled across the desert, and for the first time in a long while, he let himself feel the weight in his chest. Ease just enough to breathe, not because the storm had passed, but because someone had opened a door. By morning, the rain had passed, but the motel still wore its scars. Water pooled beneath the awnings, gutters sagged where the storm had pulled them loose. Room 3 had a leak that soaked the mattress straight through. Ellie had found it with a sigh and a resigned shake of her head, but as she dragged the soggy mattress out into the courtyard, she heard the quiet scrape of boots behind her. Ray, he didn't say anything, just grabbed the other end without being asked. They hauled it together, dropped it beside the dumpster, and without a word Ray disappeared back into the supply shed. 10 minutes later, he returned with tools, the old kind, rusted, half forgotten, but they did the job. By noon, he'd patched the roofline above room 3 using scrap tin Ellie didn't even remember keeping. By late afternoon, he'd rewired a faulty outlet in room 8 and fixed the lobby heater so it finally blew warm air instead of dust. He didn't ask for permission, he just worked, quiet, focused like it was muscle memory. Ellie found herself watching from the front steps, arms crossed, coffee in hand. Don't you ever sit down, she called. Ray glanced up from the loose siding he was reattaching on the laundry room wall. Not unless I'm ordered to, she smiled. Couldn't help it. Well, I'm the boss around here, and I'm ordering you to take a break. He wiped his hands on a rag, straightened, and walked toward her. His limp was subtle, but she noticed it now that she was looking old. Injury, probably something he carried. Without complaint. You always take in strays, he asked, leaning on the porch rail. Ellie raised an eyebrow. Only the quiet, useful ones. He gave a half laugh. Lucky me. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the clouds drift apart over the horizon. The storm had passed, but the air still held a chill that crept under doors and into bone. Ellie sipped her coffee. You ever talk about it? Ray didn't look at her, just stared at the gravel lot, at the wind lifting bits of old receipt paper and desert dust. Talk about what? Where you served, what you saw. He was quiet for a beat. Too long. I commanded a few teams, long time ago, special operations, most of it sealed now anyway. She nodded. My dad didn't talk much either, just said it was hell, and he was lucky to come back. Ray looked at her, then really looked. You close with him? I was, she said softly. He ran this place until the end, said it gave him purpose, structure. He liked hearing the old radiator click at night, said it reminded him he was still home. Ray's eyes drifted toward room 6. Seems like the kind of place a Marine would build. Ellie smiled faintly. Yeah, he never let it fall apart. But I'm not him. You've kept it going. Barely. She looked away, swallowing hard. You know, the town's breathing down my neck writing about the fire code, the electrical. I've got maybe $5,000 worth of repairs ahead of me and $0 in the bank. Ray didn't answer, just nodded once, as if he'd already known. Could this kindness lead to an unexpected rescue? 3 more days passed. Ray fixed the vending machine that had been broken since last spring, found a way to get the office Wi-Fi working again. Ellie made breakfast for them both. Just eggs and toast, sometimes pancakes on the griddle her dad used to love. They didn't talk about the future, not really, but the silence had grown easier, warmer, until Thursday. That morning, Ellie found the envelope taped to the front office door, plain white, town letterhead in the corner, inside a final notice. You are hereby given a 10-day notice to comply with Fire Safety Code 223C. Failure to install approved smoke and carbon monoxide systems in all guest rooms and replace the primary fuse box will result in immediate revocation of your business license. She stood on the porch, paper in hand, the sun not yet above the hills, and felt the ground tilt beneath her. Ray stepped out of the laundry room, wiping grease off his hands. One look at her face and he stopped short. Ellie didn't say a word, just handed him the letter. He read it, eyes narrowing, then quietly he asked, how bad? Ellie exhaled slow and shaky. It's over. That's how bad? I could look at the wiring again. No, she cut in. It's not about the wiring, it's permits, certifications, thousands of dollars in work and inspections. I can't patch my way through this one. Ray handed the letter back. You could fight it. With what, Ray? Her voice cracked. I've already tried everything. The bank said no, the county said no, even the Veterans Business Association said no. She sank into the bench outside the office, her hands trembled as she folded the letter back up. I kept this place because it was his, because it felt like the only thing I had left of him, but maybe that wasn't enough. Ray stood still for a long time, then he turned, went back inside room 5, and closed the door. The next morning, he was gone. Ellie woke to silence. No Sound of the toolbox rattling, no creak of the side gate opening. Room 5 was empty, the key lay on the desk, folded beside it, a clean square of paper, torn from her guest ledger. The note was short, written in blocky handwriting. You did what others wouldn't now. Let's see what happens when we do the same. Art. No number, no forwarding address, no clue where he went. Ellie stared at the words for a long time, then folded them in half and slipped them into her wallet. She didn't know what he meant. Didn't know if he was coming back, didn't know why it hurt so much to see that empty room. The motel felt quieter after that, not just empty, hollow. She packed up the boxes in the storage room, called a guy she knew who could help appraise what equipment might still be worth something, started sorting through her dad's old papers, his notebooks, his folded flag. By the end of the week, Ellie had made her decision. If Desert Haven had to go down, she would make sure it did with dignity. She swept the courtyard, wiped every window, polished the front bell one last time, and though she didn't know it yet, she had just cleaned the place for the most important visitors it would ever receive. The sky was a pale, breathless gray the morning the world turned upside down. Ellie stood in room 2, folding old towels into boxes, her movements slow and mechanical. She'd spent the past 2 days sorting linens, unplugging many fridges, and pulling decades of memory from the walls. The place didn't look like a motel anymore, it looked like a ghost getting ready to leave its own house. Tomorrow was the deadline. After that, Desert Haven would be condemned, locked, and eventually bulldozed if no buyer appeared. Ellie had made peace with it, at least, that's what she kept telling herself, but deep down, something hurt in a place words didn't reach. She just finished sealing the last box when she heard it, a low rumble, then another, then many. It wasn't thunder, it was engines loud, close, rolling toward her like a coming tide. Ellie frowned, walked through the lobby, and pushed open the front door and froze. Dust curled through the morning air as the first Jeep pulled into the gravel lot, then another. Then a flatbed truck, its bed stacked with lumber and coiled extension cords, military green vehicles, each one freshly painted, headlights slicing through the haze, more than a dozen in all. They rumbled in line, turned with practiced ease, and came to a coordinated halt across the front of the motel. Ellie just stood there, mouth slightly open, heart hammering. What in God's name, could this convoy hold the key to salvation? Doors opened in unison, men and women stepped out, some in crisp utility jackets, others in worn veteran caps, and a few in full fatigues. They were all different ages, some barely 30, others gray-haired and stiff in the knees, but all of them moved with the same quiet coordination, like they'd spent years walking in step. A tall man in a dark jacket unfolded a clipboard, another opened a toolbox, 2 others unloaded ladders, chatting like they were heading into a weekend project instead of storming a crumbling roadside motel. And then the lead Jeep door opened. Ellie's breath caught. Ray stepped out, only now he wasn't the same quiet man she'd handed a towel to on a stormy night. He wore his full dress uniform, pressed, polished, medals lined his chest in neat rows. His posture was rigid, proud, but not in the way that demanded attention, in the way that came from years of command, and across his nameplate, K.O. or Dalton USMC Ret. He walked toward her, boots crunching on gravel until they stood 5 feet apart. He removed his cap, held it to his chest. Miss Sanders, he said formally, voice steady. Permission to assist. Ellie couldn't speak, her throat had closed completely. Ray's face softened. I believe your motel has a fire code issue. My team and I have experience with difficult logistics. Still nothing. Behind him, 2 younger men carried in coils of new electrical wire. Someone else rolled out fire extinguishers still wrapped in plastic. Ellie blinked, finally finding her voice. Ray, what? What is this? He stepped closer. After I left, I made some calls. To who? To men I served with, to people who owe me favors, to foundations that help veterans rebuild their lives. He looked at the peeling paint behind her shoulder. But this time, we're not rebuilding for us, we're rebuilding for you. Ellie felt the words hit her like wind against open windows. Ray gestured behind him. They're volunteers, some active duty, some retired. One's a master electrician, one served as a fire marshal before he enlisted, another designs trauma recovery spaces for vets with PTSD. They're not here for pay. He paused, then added, they're here because I told them. Someone looked me in the eye when the rest of the world passed me by. Someone opened a door, no questions asked, and I told them it was time we returned that kind of dignity. Ellie's hands were shaking now, but I didn't do anything, she whispered. Ray smiled gently. That's the thing, you didn't ask for anything, that's what made it matter. The next hour unfolded like a dream. Ladders leaned against the building, workers moved with quiet efficiency. A new circuit box was unloaded and wheeled into the utility room. Smoke detectors were lined up on the front desk like little soldiers waiting for deployment. Ellie stood off to the side, dazed. A young woman in a gray beanie approached her carrying a tablet. Ma'am, I'm Willa. I was on Colonel Dalton's team during his last assignment in Afghanistan. He's kind of a legend. Ellie blinked. He never told me that. Willa smiled. He wouldn't, but when he sent out the call, no one hesitated, he said, and I quote, She saw me when I was invisible, we owe her. Ellie felt tears sting her eyes. She turned just in time to see two men reattaching the weathered Desert Haven sign to a brand new support beam. One of them had a prosthetic hand, the other wore an old Navy ball cap and whistled softly as he worked. She pressed a fist to her mouth. The sound of drills and laughter filled the air. It didn't feel like construction, it felt like redemption. Later that afternoon, Ray stood beside her near room 5 as electricians finished the last of the wiring. "You don't have to say anything," he said quietly. Ellie turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You came back." "I never really left," she laughed softly, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "This isn't real, right?" "I'm dreaming." Ray looked at the workers, the trucks, the team laughing in the courtyard. "No," he said, "this is what it looks like when service comes full circle." Ellie's gaze fell on a plaque someone had just set down beside the entrance. It was small, brass, already shining in the afternoon sun, etched into it, "Desert Haven for those who served and the ones who remember." She reached for Ray's arm, not out of weakness, out of grounding, because in that moment, the motel wasn't just saved, it was transformed. 2 weeks later, Desert Haven didn't just look different, it felt different, like something had shifted beneath the dirt and wiring and weathered wood, something deeper than paint or patchwork. The siding was clean and freshly sealed, a soft desert beige with green trim that caught the morning light just right. New signage stood proudly at the entrance, set into the ground beside a flagpole Ray and his team had installed by hand. The sign was brass, simple, bold: Desert Haven Veteran Rest and Retreat. Founded on gratitude, and Ellie stood beside it, hands tucked into her jacket pockets, staring at it like it still didn't feel quite real. 4 of the rooms had been fully converted, soundproofed, gently lit with memory foam beds and blackout curtains. Veterans suffering from PTSD could now rest without the threat of sirens, slamming doors, or dreams that chased them down. Room 6 had a therapy dog kennel outside. Room 7 had been turned into a small reading room stocked with paperbacks and journals. Room 10, once used to store broken vending machines, now held a donated massage chair and a coffee machine with more buttons than Ellie knew how to use. People had started coming. First, it was a retired Marine and his wife passing through on their way to California, then, a Vietnam vet from Prescott who heard about the place from an old buddy, then, a Gulf War medic who hadn't slept through the night in 15 years, but did hear. Ellie ran the front desk like she always had, but now, with volunteers helping on weekends and veterans offering to mow the lawn or patch the fence in exchange for nothing but a thank you and a hot meal. And every now and then, when the sun dipped low and the gravel lot shimmered with dusk, Ellie would step out and see a young man sitting quietly by the fire pit, or an old woman wiping tears from her eyes after a moment alone in the chapel room they'd converted from an old storage shed. It wasn't fancy, but it was sacred. A month after the convoy first arrived, Ellie received a letter with a government seal. Inside was an invitation and the National Veterans Transition Conference, Flagstaff, Arizona, a panel featuring civilian-led initiatives in veteran reintegration support. "We respectfully invite Ms. Ellie Sanders, Director of Desert Haven Veteran Retreat, to speak as a featured guest." Ellie had stared at it for a long time, not quite believing Ray had found her at the counter that morning, gripping the paper like it might disappear. "You going to go?" he asked. "I'm not a speaker," she murmured. "I run a motel." Ray just gave her that same quiet look, one that never rushed, never pushed. "You run a home, Ellie, and you don't have to give a speech, just tell the truth." So she went, wore her best jeans and her father's old Marine Corps pin on her lapel, and when it was her turn to take the stage, she stepped up to the mic with hands that shook slightly, but a voice that didn't waver. "I didn't build Desert Haven to change the world," she said. "I kept it running because my dad believed in places like this, quiet places, safe places where no one had to explain why they couldn't sleep through the night or why certain noises made them flinch." She paused, eyes sweeping across the room. "I didn't know I'd be part of something bigger, but I opened a door and someone walked through it, and then he brought the rest of them with him." She stepped back to applause that felt too big for her name, but exactly right for the story. Back at the motel, things settled into a rhythm that felt almost holy. Breakfast was served at 7, coffee brewed strong by 6:30. Most evenings, someone built a fire in the courtyard ring, and people sat, old, young, silent, talkative, all with one thing in common: they had worn the uniform. Ellie kept a journal. Now, she didn't call it that, it was notes for improvement, she'd say, but inside, she wrote down moments, names, the way one woman left a purple heart wrapped in a handkerchief. "It's a thank you," the boy who'd brought his dad, a vet with brain trauma, and whispered, "He finally smiled here." People came, people stayed, and then they healed. One night, the air was still and cool, the kind of Arizona evening that holds the last of the day's warmth just long enough to make you nostalgic. Ellie sat on the front steps of the lobby, a blanket over her knees, a chipped mug of chamomile in her hand. The courtyard was quiet now, most of the rooms were full, lights glowing softly behind drawn curtains. She didn't know every guest's name, but she didn't need to. She knew what they carried, and tonight they'd been given peace. Ray walked out from the shadows near the side path, a second mug in hand, steam curled from the top. "Thought you could use a refill," he said. Ellie smiled and scooted over. You always bring the good stuff. He sat down beside her with the ease of someone who belonged. They watched the lights for a long moment, saying nothing. Finally, Ray spoke. I've seen a lot of places, Ellie. Conflict zones, base camps, places where every breath felt borrowed, but I've never felt peace like this. Ellie looked at him. His face was still weathered, still marked by years of service and sacrifice, but softer now, like something inside him had settled. She turned her eyes back to the glowing windows, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe it's because here they're remembered. Ray nodded slowly, and neither of them said another word, because they didn't have to. Sometimes the loudest gratitude is silence, sometimes the strongest homes are built on kindness, and sometimes all it takes is one open door. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.